What happens when one of the most respected men in all of Hollywood walks into a room full of cameras, smiling faces, and fresh coffee, expecting a friendly morning conversation, and instead finds himself sitting across from a host who has already made up her mind about him before he even opens his mouth? It only took 45 seconds. 45 seconds from the moment Morgan Freeman eased himself into that guest chair on the Today Show set for the very first question out of Savannah Guthrie's mouth to land like a stone dropped from a great height. 45 seconds before the entire energy in Studio 1A shifted from warm and welcoming to something colder and much harder to look at. 45 seconds before one of the greatest living voices in the history of cinema looked across that table, let a long and quiet pause settle over the room, and decided that he was not going to sit there and take that. Not today. Not in front of millions of people watching at home. Not from anyone. What followed over the next several minutes was something that the people in that studio would be talking about for a very long time. A conversation that started as a simple morning interview and slowly turned into something far more serious. Something that revealed, in real time, exactly who each person in that room truly was. This is the story of what happened inside that studio on what looked like a perfectly ordinary morning. A morning that began with an icon walking through the door and ended with that same icon walking back out of it. Part 1. The arrival. Morgan Freeman did not need an introduction. The moment he stepped through the doors and onto the set of the Today Show, the energy in the room changed. The crew smiled. The producers nodded. Even the camera operators paused for just a moment. This was a man who had spent decades on screen, whose voice could make even the simplest sentence feel important, whose face carried the kind of calm that most people spend their whole lives trying to find. He was there to talk about his work, about the things he cared about the projects he had poured himself into. He was there, in short, to have a good conversation. He wore a simple dark jacket. He moved slowly and with purpose, the way a man does when he has absolutely nothing to prove to anyone in the room. He greeted the crew with nods and quiet words. He shook hands with the floor director. He accepted a cup of coffee and sat down in the chair across from the panel with the relaxed ease of someone who has done this 1,000 times, which he had. Hoda Kotb was already at the table. She looked genuinely pleased to see him. "We are so glad you are here," she said, leaning slightly forward with a warm smile. "This is honestly one of those mornings where you come in and you think, today is going to be a good day." Morgan Freeman smiled back at her. "Well," he said, in that low and unhurried voice, "I appreciate that very much." Al Roker was standing just off to the side, as he often did before the segment began, and he walked over to shake Freeman's hand. "Man, I cannot tell you how many times I have watched you on screen and just thought, that is somebody who really understands people," Al said. "You bring something to everything you do. It is always a pleasure." "Thank you, my friend," Freeman replied. "That means a lot." Craig Melvin was already seated at the far end of the table, flipping through some papers. He looked up and nodded. "Good to have you here, sir," he said simply. And there was genuine respect in the way he said it. The mood was easy. The lights were warm. The audience in the studio was buzzing with the kind of low and happy energy that comes from being in the presence of someone truly remarkable. And then Savannah Guthrie sat down. She came in quickly, barely glancing at Freeman as she settled into her seat. She shuffled her notes. She adjusted her earpiece. She looked at the camera, then at her papers, then back at the camera. She did not greet him. She did not say hello. She did not even look directly at him until the red light came on and the segment began. And the moment it did, something in the room changed. Part 2. The first 45 seconds. The segment opened the way most Today Show segments do. There was a brief recorded introduction that played on the monitors, showing clips from some of Morgan Freeman's most celebrated work. His voice filled the studio, deep and resonant, rolling over the audience like a warm wave. People in the crowd smiled. Some of them closed their eyes for just a moment to listen. Then the clip ended, and Savannah Guthrie looked straight at him and said, without any warmth at all, "So, you are back in the press again." It was not a question. It was not a greeting. It was a statement. He delivered with the kind of flat directness that made several people at the table sit up just a little bit straighter. Morgan Freeman looked at her. He did not rush to respond. He let a moment pass. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You have been doing the rounds," Savannah continued, glancing down at her notes as if she barely needed to look at him to make her point. "The press circuit. The interviews. You are promoting something?" "I am," he said. "I am very proud of the work." "Right," she said. And then she moved on so quickly that it seemed almost designed to catch him off guard. "Let me just ask you something directly, because I think our viewers deserve directness." She looked up from her papers now and fixed her eyes on him. "There are people who feel that at this point in your career, you have said everything you need to say. That the work speaks for itself. So why are you still here?" The studio went very, very quiet. Hoda blinked. Al Roker, who had just stepped back toward the table, stopped moving. Craig Melvin looked up from his papers slowly, his expression unreadable. Morgan Freeman looked at Savannah Guthrie for a long moment. He did not look angry. He did not look hurt. He looked, if anything, like a man who had just heard something mildly interesting and was deciding how best to respond to it. "Well," he said at last, and even in that single word, there was something that commanded the room. "I suppose I am still here because I still have things to say." He smiled, just slightly. Savannah did not smile back. "Fair enough," she said, in a tone that made it clear she did not find it particularly fair at all. Part 3. The pressure builds. For the next few minutes, the conversation moved along a surface-level path. Savannah asked about the project. Morgan answered. But there was something underneath the exchange. Something that everyone in the studio could feel, but nobody was naming yet. Savannah's questions were clipped. Her follow-ups were pointed in ways that seemed less about curiosity and more about something else entirely. She was not digging for good television. She was digging for something else. Hoda Kotb stepped in gently at one point, clearly trying to bring some lightness back. "Can I just ask," she said, turning to Morgan with a big smile, "because I think this is what everyone at home wants to know. When you look at the body of work, all of it, is there a role or a project that still just sits with you, and one that you carry with you?" Morgan Freeman nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for exactly that kind of question. "There are a few," he said. "The ones that really live in you are the ones that required you to find something in yourself that you did not know was there. You go looking for the character, and you end up finding yourself instead. That is the gift of this work." The audience responded warmly. There were smiles all around the table. Even Craig Melvin leaned forward with genuine interest, but Savannah was already moving. "That's a lovely answer," she said, with an edge in her voice that made it feel like the opposite of a compliment. "Very polished, very practiced. You have been doing this for a long time." Freeman looked at her. "I have," he said simply. "Does it ever feel automatic to you?" she pressed. "Like you are just going through the motions, showing up, saying the things people expect you to say, collecting the applause?" Al Roker cleared his throat. It was soft, barely there, but it was the kind of sound a person makes when they want to say something and are holding themselves back from saying it. Morgan Freeman set down his coffee cup. He did it slowly and deliberately. He placed it on the table with a soft click and then folded his hands and looked at Savannah Guthrie with the calm, steady gaze of someone who is in absolutely no hurry whatsoever. Let me make sure I understand you, he said. Are you asking me whether the work I have dedicated my life to has become meaningless to me? Savannah held his gaze. I am asking whether it has become routine, she said. Those are two very different questions, he replied. And the answer to both of them is no. Part 4. Savannah goes further. There was a moment, a brief and fragile moment, where things could have gone another way, where Savannah could have pivoted to something lighter, where the conversation could have found its way back to the genuine exchange that everyone else at that table was clearly hoping for. She did not take that moment. Instead, she glanced down at her notes again and said, There is a perception, and I think it is worth addressing because it is out there, that you are someone who is difficult, on set, in interviews, that you can be, let us say, uncooperative when things do not go the way you prefer them to go. The air in the studio became very still. Morgan Freeman did not move. He sat exactly as he had been sitting, hands folded, back straight, eyes on Savannah. But something in his expression had shifted. Not anger, not defensiveness. Something more like the quiet and patient look of a person who is witnessing something and deciding very carefully what to do about it. Hoda Kotb spoke first. I think, she said carefully, that Morgan has had an extraordinary career built on collaboration and real dedication. She looked at him with an apologetic kind of warmth. The people who have worked with him speak very highly of him. Savannah looked at Hoda briefly, then back at Freeman. Of course, she said, but perception matters, and I think our audience deserves to hear him address it. What exactly, Morgan Freeman said, his voice still quiet, still measured, is the perception you are referring to? That you can be difficult, Savannah repeated, as if saying it twice made it more true. Ren, that you sometimes push back in ways that are not always welcome. I see, he said. Does that resonate with you at all? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I push back when pushing back is called for. I would think most people with any sense of themselves do the same. Right, Savannah said. But there is a difference between having a strong sense of self and being, let us be honest, a little unapproachable. The word hung in the air. Craig Melvin put his pen down on the table. He did it quietly, but the sound was somehow loud in that particular moment. Part 5. Al Roker tries. Al Roker had been standing at the edge of the set, and now he stepped forward and pulled out his chair and sat down fully at the table. He did it with purpose, the way a person does when they feel it is time to be present in a situation. Can I jump in here? He said, looking at Morgan Freeman with a smile that was entirely genuine. Because I have to say, and I think I speak for a lot of people watching at home when I say this, Morgan Freeman is one of those people who, when you are around him, you just feel it. There is something there. You feel it. He shook his head a little, smiling. The work you have done over the years, the way you have carried yourself, I do not think unapproachable is a word anybody who has actually spent time with you would use. Morgan Freeman looked at Al and nodded slowly. Thank you, he said, and it was simple and genuine and held no performance in it at all. Savannah jumped back in before the warmth could settle. That's very nice, she said, and I respect that. But Al, you are a colleague in television. You are not someone who has been on a film set with him or who has tried to book him for a project that he turned down without much of an explanation. Al looked at her. Savannah. No, I am just saying, she continued, pressing forward. We should be honest with our guests instead of just celebrating them. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. Morgan Freeman looked from Savannah to Al, and then he looked at Savannah very directly and said, I appreciate that you feel a responsibility to your viewers. I do, but I want to ask you something. Savannah raised an eyebrow slightly. Go ahead. Is this an interview, he said, or is this something else? The question was not rude. It was not aggressive. It was delivered with the same steady calm he had maintained since the beginning. But it was also unmistakably clear, and it landed in the room the way a question only lands when it has been earned. Savannah straightened in her chair. "This is an interview," she said. "I am asking questions." "You are making statements," he said, "and then asking me to confirm them? That is a different thing." Part 6. The panel responds. Hoda Khattab reached for her water glass and took a sip and looked at the table. There was something in her body language that said she wanted to say more and was carefully choosing whether to say it. Craig Melvin spoke. "I think what Morgan is pointing out," he said, his voice measured and even, "is that there is a distinction between accountability journalism, which we all respect and which has its place, and something that is a little more personal. And I think that distinction matters." He looked at Savannah briefly. "Because the person sitting across from us today has been nothing but gracious since he walked in." Savannah looked at Craig for a moment. Her expression did not change much, but something behind it flickered. "I appreciate that perspective," she said, and then she turned back to Morgan Freeman and kept going. "Let me try a different angle," she said. "Your longevity in Hollywood is remarkable. Nobody disputes that. But there is also a conversation happening about older voices taking up space that could go to newer, younger ones. Do you think about that? Do you think about stepping aside?" The question was delivered cleanly, but it hit hard. Because it was not really a question about generational shift in Hollywood. It was something more personal than that, and everyone at the table could hear it. Morgan Freeman looked at her for a long time before he spoke. When he did, his voice had not changed at all. It was still low, still unhurried, still carrying that particular quality that made people lean in to hear what came next. "I have spent my life showing up," he said, "doing the work, doing it honestly and with everything I had. And I have watched younger actors come up, and I have stood in their corner, and I have encouraged them, and I have gotten out of the way when getting out of the way was right. So no, I do not think about stepping aside the way you mean it, because I have never been someone who was taking up space. I have been filling it, and there is a difference." Hoda quietly said, "Yes." Al Roker nodded. Craig Melvin sat back in his chair with the look of a man who had just heard exactly the right thing said. Part 7. Savannah doubles down. Most people at that point in the conversation would have read the room, would have felt the shift, would have recognized that the ground had moved beneath them and adjusted accordingly. Most people would have taken a breath and found their way back to something resembling a normal interview. Savannah Guthrie was not interested in adjusting. "I want to go back to something," she said, flipping through her notes again with the focused energy of someone who had a destination in mind and was not going to be redirected from it. "You said in a previous interview, and I am paraphrasing here, that you do not feel a need to explain yourself to anyone, that you operate by your own standards. Can you talk about what that means to you?" Morgan Freeman looked at her. "I said that I try to live with integrity," he said. "That is what it means." "But operating by your own standards," she pressed, "that can also mean not being accountable to the people around you. Do you see how that could read as arrogance?" There was a sharp and distinct quality to the silence that followed. Hoda Khattab set her pen down. Craig Melvin looked at the ceiling for a brief moment, the way a person does when they are summoning patience. Al Roker looked directly at Savannah. "I think," he said slowly and carefully, "we might be reading a quote in a way that the person who said it did not intend." "That is possible," Savannah said, without looking at Al. "Morgan, am I reading it in a way you did not intend?" Morgan Freeman was quiet for a moment. "What?" Then he said, "I think what you are doing," and his voice was still entirely calm, entirely without heat, "is looking for a version of me that fits a story you came in with, and I am not sure that version exists." Savannah tilted her head slightly. "That is an interesting way to characterize an interview." It is an honest way, he said. I am being honest too, she said. Are you? He said. And again. That silence. Part 8. The conversation fractures. It was Hoda who tried to bring things back. She looked at Morgan with the warmth she had carried throughout the whole exchange and said, I want to ask about the work itself, because I think that is where your heart really is, and I think that is what our viewers at home are most interested in. When you are in the middle of a project, when you are really inside it, what does that feel like for you? Morgan Freeman turned to Hoda, and the tension in his face eased very slightly, like a door opening, just a crack to let a little light through. It feels, he said, like the truest version of myself. You go looking for the character, and sometimes the character leads you somewhere you were not expecting to go. Somewhere you needed to go. That is the part that never gets old. I love that, Hoda said. Craig Melvin leaned forward. And for people who are maybe just discovering your work, younger viewers, people who are coming to it fresh, what do you hope they take from it? I hope they take from it whatever they need, Morgan said. That's the beauty of it. You put something true on screen, and different people receive it in different ways. The story belongs to the audience once it is out there. It is no longer mine. The room breathed a little. For a moment, it felt like the interview might find its footing. And then Savannah spoke again. That is a beautiful sentiment, she said. But I want to push back on one thing, because I think it is important. She looked at him steadily. You say the story belongs to the audience, but you have also, throughout your career, resisted public discussion of your personal life in ways that some would say have been actively misleading. Do you feel any responsibility to the audience when it comes to who you actually are as a person, off-screen? Morgan Freeman looked at her. He did not say anything immediately. When he did speak, it was quietly and with great care. What you are asking me, he said, though, is whether I owe strangers the details of my private life. I am asking about transparency, Savannah said. No, he said. You are asking about something else. I am asking about honesty, she said. Then let me be honest, he said. Right now, with you, in this room, and everyone at the table went very still. Part 9. Morgan Freeman speaks. Morgan Freeman unfolded his hands. He sat forward just slightly in his chair, the way a person does when they want to make sure the person they are speaking to understands that what they are about to say is not an accident and is not a performance. Every word is chosen. Every word is meant. I came here today, he said, in good faith. I came here to talk about something I care about. I expected a conversation. What I got instead was a series of suggestions. Suggestions that I am difficult, that I am arrogant, that I owe explanations to people I have never met, that I am taking up space I should give back. He paused. I have been in this business for a very long time. I have sat across from a lot of people and answered a lot of questions. And in all of that time, I have tried to be honest, to be present, and to treat the people I am talking to with respect. Savannah opened her mouth. I am not finished, he said. Still quiet, still calm, but absolutely clear. She closed her mouth. The questions you have asked me today, he continued, were not designed to illuminate anything. They were designed to diminish. And I'm going to tell you something honestly. Not because you asked me to be honest, but because I am choosing to be. What you have done here today is not journalism. It is not accountability. It is something smaller than that. And I think you know it. The studio was silent enough to hear the lights humming. Hoda Kotb had her hand over her mouth slightly, not covering it, just resting there. Her eyes were wide and steady. Al Roker had both arms folded on the table in front of him and was looking at Morgan Freeman with an expression that was hard to read but impossible to look away from. Craig Melvin was sitting perfectly still, his eyes moving between Morgan and Savannah with the calm attention of someone watching something important unfold. Savannah Guthrie looked at Morgan Freeman. Her expression had shifted. The sharp assurance that had been there from the beginning had softened, not into warmth, but into something more guarded. She was recalculating. You could see it happening. "I hear you," she said at last. "I do. But I want to be clear that my intention was never." "I know what your intention was," he said gently. "That is what concerns me." Part 10. The Table Turns. What was remarkable about the next few minutes was not that the conversation continued. It was how it continued. Because once Morgan Freeman had said what he said, once he had laid it out in plain language with no anger and no performance attached to it, something shifted in the room that could not be shifted back. The panel was no longer a unified front with Savannah at the center. It had fractured quietly and naturally into something else, something more honest. Hoda spoke first. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "I want to say, and I think this matters, that I have been sitting here, and I have felt, every step of the way, how gracious you have been, how patient. And I just want to acknowledge that, because I think it deserves to be acknowledged." Morgan Freeman looked at her. "Thank you," he said simply. Al Roker leaned forward. "I think there is something that gets lost sometimes in morning television," he said, choosing his words with obvious care. "And it is the simple fact that the people who sit in that chair, the guests who come in and give their time, deserve to be treated with a basic level of dignity. And I think today," he paused, "I think today we did not always hit that mark, and I am sorry for that." It was a remarkable thing to say. In the middle of a live segment, on national television, Al Roker looked directly at Morgan Freeman and said it like he meant it, because he did. Morgan Freeman nodded at him, slowly, with a depth of respect that did not need to be announced to be felt. Craig Melvin spoke next. "I want to just say for the record," he said, "that the work speaks. It genuinely speaks. And the person sitting across from us today speaks too, clearly and honestly. And I think that is worth more than any question any of us could have asked this morning." Savannah Guthrie did not speak for a moment. When she did, her voice had lost the clipped precision it had carried since the beginning. "I clearly..." She stopped, looked at her notes, looked up. "I hear what is being said, and I will think about it." Morgan Freeman looked at her. "Good," he said. That was all. Part 11. The Exit Builds. After the next segment tease played, the commercial break kicked in, and the studio atmosphere changed the way it always does in those breaks. The floor director moved in. Crew members adjusted equipment. A few of the audience members shifted in their seats and murmured quietly to each other. Morgan Freeman did not reach for his coffee. He sat in his chair the way he had sat there for the entire interview. Still, with that quality of stillness that was not passive, but active. Chosen. Hoda leaned over to him during the break and said something quietly. He listened and nodded and said something back. And she smiled. And it was the kind of exchange that did not need to be heard to be understood. Al Roker stood and walked around to Morgan's side of the table and extended his hand. Morgan shook it. Al held it for a moment and said something close. Morgan nodded again. Craig Melvin did not walk over, but across the table he made eye contact with Morgan and gave a single slow nod, and that nod communicated everything it needed to. Savannah Guthrie looked at her notes during the break. She did not walk over. She did not say anything to him across the table. She sat with her papers and her earpiece and whatever it was she was sitting with. When the floor director held up fingers to signal the return from break, Morgan Freeman looked out at the studio audience briefly. Several people in the front rows were watching him with expressions that made it clear they had felt everything that happened in the previous segment. A woman in the third row gave him the smallest nod. He returned it. The red light came on. Savannah looked at her notes and then up at the camera and began the next segment. and Morgan Freeman reached very calmly for the small microphone clip attached to his jacket lapel. He unclipped it. He set it on the table in front of him. The sound it made was very small, the smallest possible sound. But in a room full of people with earpieces and audio equipment and years of experience in live television, it was unmistakable. A microphone going down on a table during a live segment means one thing, and one thing only. Hoda saw it. Her eyes moved to his hands, and then to his face. Al Roker saw it. He went very still. Craig Melvin looked at the microphone on the table, and then at Morgan Freeman's face, and something in his own expression became very quiet and very present. Savannah Guthrie looked up from her notes and saw it too. Part 12. The exit Morgan Freeman rose from his chair. He did it without urgency and without drama. He did it the way a man rises when he has made a decision, and the decision is entirely his, and he is entirely at peace with it. And he straightened his jacket. He looked around the table. He looked at Hoda Kotb, and he said, quietly, "You are kind. Thank you for that." Hoda said, "Thank you for being here." He looked at Al Roker, and he said, "I appreciate you." Al said, "Always." He looked at Craig Melvin and gave him a nod, and Craig gave it back, and those two nods said everything. Then he looked at Savannah Guthrie. He did not look at her with anger. He did not look at her with contempt. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you have said what needed to be said, and there is nothing more that needs to be added. "Good luck with the rest of your program," he said. He turned. He walked. The studio audience watched him go. Several of them began to applaud, softly at first, then with more certainty. Not a rowdy or excited applause. Something quieter than that. Tpasin. Something more like the sound a room full of people makes when they have witnessed something true, and they want to acknowledge it without being too loud about it. Morgan Freeman did not look back. He walked the way he had walked in. Slowly. With purpose. With no particular hurry to be anywhere or away from anywhere. He passed the cameras and the crew members and the lighting rigs and the rows of audience seats. He passed the monitors on the side wall where his own face had played in clips less than 20 minutes before. He reached the doors. He pushed through them. And he was gone. Part 13. The room left behind. For several seconds, the Today Show set was the quietest it had been all morning. Savannah Guthrie looked at her notes. Then she looked at the camera. Then she looked at the empty chair across from her. The microphone was still sitting on the table. The coffee cup was still there too. Still warm. Hoda Kotb did not say anything immediately. She had the look of someone processing what they had just been a part of. Her hands were folded in front of her on the table, and she was looking at the space where Morgan Freeman had been sitting with an expression that was careful and considered. Al Roker reached up and adjusted his earpiece. He exhaled, short and quiet. Craig Melvin picked up his pen. Put it back down. Picked it up again. The floor director was talking quietly into his headset. Someone from the production team was moving quickly along the edge of the studio, the kind of quick, purposeful movement that happens when the people running a live program are recalibrating what the next few minutes are going to look like. Savannah Guthrie cleared her throat. She looked at the camera. She is a professional. She has been doing this for a very long time, and she did what professionals do. She moved forward. "We will be right back," she said. The monitors cut to commercial, and in the studio, in that pause between what had happened and whatever came next, the four people still at the table existed in the kind of quiet that does not need to be filled. The kind of quiet that is its own full and complete thing. The kind of quiet that arrives after something real has taken place and is simply acknowledging it. Somewhere on the other side of those doors, Morgan Freeman was walking. Down a hallway, past a security desk, through a lobby, out into the air. Moving exactly the way he had moved through that whole morning. Slowly, with purpose, without a single look back. There is a version of what happened inside Studio 1A that morning that talks about what a morning interview is supposed to look like, about the balance between challenge and celebration, about what a host owes a guest and what a guest owes a host, about the unwritten rules that govern the spaces where cameras roll and words go out into the world and cannot be taken back. And then there is the version that is simpler than all of that. A man walked into a room. He was treated in a way that he did not deserve to be treated. He said so, plainly and calmly, and without making it ugly. And then he left. And the people who watched it, the ones in the room and the ones at home, they felt something. Something that is hard to name exactly, but that most people, when they feel it, recognize immediately. It is the feeling you get when you watch somebody refuse to be made small. When you watch a person sit in the fire of someone else's agenda and remain, somehow, completely themselves. When you watch somebody show you, without ever raising their voice or losing their composure, what dignity actually looks like when it is tested. Morgan Freeman walked into that studio on a morning that was supposed to be simple, and he left it having shown everyone who was watching exactly who he is. The chair was empty. The microphone sat on the table. The coffee was still warm, and the doors had closed quietly behind him. Some exits do not need to be loud to be heard.